What's up, everybody? It's Olaf, and today we are here in a Game of Thrones once again, and this time I want to talk to you a little bit about houses, specifically houses that I think you should play as. Now, I know people who are familiar with the show are probably more inclined to play as, the Starks, maybe the Tullys, maybe Dorne just because they have a cool spear, but what about the smaller houses? What about the minor houses where you can forge their own destiny for yourself rather than be a pre-established great house? Because, let's be frank, there's not as much to do when you already are at the top in a game like this. So, in this video, I'd like to talk a little bit about some of the small houses that I recommend, maybe give you a little bit of the lore behind them, and then you can decide for yourself if those sound interesting. Our first house is going to find us here in the Crownlands, which is basically just the area around King's Landing. But we're going to talk about House Valerian. Now, the Valerians, interestingly enough, are in some way related to the Targaryens as they are Valerian, and there's been a lot of inbreeding over the years. However, they were never dragon riders. They were a seafaring people and have been around for an incredibly long time. And in fact, they're one of the oldest allies of the Targaryens, which could play into how you play this playthrough. Now, I recommend starting off during Robb's Rebellion and maybe trying to help the Targaryens stay in power, but you don't necessarily have to because they don't dissolve when the war is lost. You could also play as House Celtigar up here, which is another very small Valerian house who only has about, I think, one county. And then you do also get to have a Valerian steel axe if you play as them, which is interesting. And while playing as House Valerian, you could maybe try to aim for Dragonstone and taking over this region, because if you check right here, has this High Lordship of Dragonstone, which is a pretty good little area. So if you're trying to be a big lord here in the Crownlands, you can't go much worse than this. Thing to note, though, is that you will be obligated to the king of the realm. Most of the time, they are going to have high crown authority, so you're going to have to figure out a way to get them to lower it or to get a hook on them so that you're actually going to be able to go to war, because most of the time, they're not going to let you. Coming over here to the Stormlands now, the land of the Baratheons and the Endless Storm, we have House Dondarrion, which many of you might be familiar with if you watched the show. You might be familiar with this little lad, Beric, the Lightning Lord, the man who was killed 6 times and brought back 6 times, and whose sword lights on fire. Very cool. There's not much known about this house really other than what Beric has shown us, that he was a great knight, that they are a house of great knights, and that they are bitter enemies with Dorne because of their proximity. I mean, they touch the region right here. Their sigil is a forked lightning with stars. It represents a time when a Dondarrion, back in the day before they were a house, was a messenger for a noble, and he was on his way to deliver said message, and the messenger was waylaid by 2 basically bandits, but instead of being killed, the bandits were struck by forked lightning, and the Dondarrion was spared, and they put it on their sigil. Very cool. In my head, they would still be seeking revenge against Dorne, so that could be a fun way to not try to invade your own country, but to try to take over another. The second house in the Stormlands I want to talk about is House Tarth, which, if you know anything, then you know about our beautiful Lady Brienne, who is not ugly, in fact, but is a giant, beautiful woman with strong, great strength. Okay? Don't fight me. I will be very upset. Lady Tarth is from House Tarth, Lordship of Evenfall, which is a very cool name, and their lord is generally known as the Evenstar, which is taken from Tolkien's Lord of the Rings, a bit of a nod to them. Now, they start off on an island, and if you know anything about me, I am always prone to starting somewhere away from everyone else. They start off with 4 regions. You start off as their lord, who's only 36. He is single, so you can marry, and you have 2 children who need to be married as well. I would recommend making Brienne a knight, as she is in the game, but you don't have to. And what you do from this point is definitely up to you. You could try to take over the Stormlands, although I doubt the Tarths would really do that. You could play tall and just sort of develop as much as possible, and then it's just assist the realm. It's really up to you. I just really love their sigil, and I really enjoy Lady Brienne, and From the Dawn is a cool motto. So down here in Dorne, I don't actually have much to recommend. I don't play down here very much, but I will recommend one that isn't just the entirety of Dorne, and this one's not going to be that unique. A lot of people have played as them, but playing as House Dane is always a cool option. You have the legendary Sword of the Morning, Arthur Dane, one of the greatest swords fighters who's ever lived, and you could try to keep him alive, although he's a Kingsguard and very likely he will die. Historically, he died in a battle at the Tower of Joy against Ed Stark, and I believe his name was Howland Reed. Let's see, let me go up here actually. It should be this guy, yeah, Lord Howland Reed. So you could try to rewrite history, or you can just simply play as them. They get a lot of strong alliances due to their proximity with Old Town, Redwine, and just the Reach in general. So it could be a fun one to play. Maybe work your way to reclaiming the land for the Stone Dornish. That could be something cool to do. But if you have anything else down here that you would recommend to other people, please leave those in the comments because I'd be interested too. Next up, we're going to hop to the Reach, and the Reach is interesting because there's so many titles that you can go for. Honestly, it would be sort of foolish of me to just highlight one individually, so I'm just going to talk about a couple. We have Lord Randall of the West March. He's of House Tarly, which, as you know, is Sam's house from Game of Thrones. He starts off with a Valerian weapon, which would be, hold on, I can't remember the name, which is Heartsbane. They are one of the few houses in the game that canonically starts off with that. But you can also add mods, and then they'll start off with them as well. But that's entirely up to you. The Tarleys are one of the strongest houses in the Reach, so if you did have ambitions to take Highgarden from the Tullys, not the Tullys, I'm sorry, the Tyrells. If you did have ambitions to take Highgarden from the Tyrells, then that would be a solid start. I also really enjoy Old Town. House Hightower is incredibly strong. They have a literal ton of kids that you can marry off if you so wish. Or you could play as somebody like Redwine and just watch as things go by. Be a trading city. It really is up to you. And there's a lot of great sigils all over the place here in the Reach. So if one just strikes your fancy, then I highly recommend it. Normally I'll play as the Tarleys if I'm going to go over here, or I'll play as Redwine, and I don't really have a reason for Redwine, I just think they look neat. We're here in the Westerlands, home of the Lannisters, which you can play as well. They have sort of an interesting start because they really only have 2 marryable children. You can try to get Jaime off the hook if you win the war, but that's not usually how it goes. So we're going to go here to the duchy titles, and I'm going to recommend 2 of them that I think are quite cool. First of all, House Crakehall. Absolute Giga Chad house. All of their children are enormous. If you look at them, they're all robust. Personally, I love Lyle, Strongbore Crakehall. Man starts off with Herculean Skilled Fighter, 26. He's only 18. The man is a giant. Absolute giant. House Crakehall also comes with Jaime to the Riverlands when they go siege it. So that's an interesting bit of lore. Also, their sigil is a boar. So that's really, really cool. Now, obviously, I'm only doing duchies. But of course, I have to move in down here to Casterly Rock and talk about my boys here, the Cleganes. Now, if you want to start off as a very, very small county and work your way up, there are few who have better chances because you get the mountain that rides, who has an absolutely insane starting prowess. And personally, I have played as the Cleganes. And the mountain's prowess for me went almost all the way up to 80, so really solid. You also get Sandor, who will live most of the time throughout your game. Theoretically, will live through most of the time, so he makes an excellent marshal in his own right if you guys can get over your rivalry, or you can kill him, which is always fun. I also really enjoy the people that are over here, particularly Hornvale, because, I mean, they have a unicorn. A unicorn is their sigil. That's cool. I really have nothing else to say. Now, this is probably the result of a mod, but a lot of these are popping up with Valerian weapons. Most of these don't have them. In fact, famously, this is just a little tidbit of lore, Lord Tywin is upset that the Lannisters do not have an ancestral weapon, which is why Ice, the Stark's ancestral weapon, is reforged basically into 2 weapons, one for Jaime and one for Joffrey, and the one for Jaime is given to Lady Brienne of Tarth and made into Oathkeeper, as you may or may not know. But those don't exist yet at this time. In fact, if you come up here, you will see that Starks have ice because it has not been reforged. Alright, next up we have everybody's favorite place to burn, the Riverlands, owned by the Tullys, not the Tyrells this time. This time I am correct in saying the Tullys. And you have a lot of cool things that you can choose from here. Personally, rebuilding House Harrenhal is always cool. You get a really, really sweet little graphic here. That's always an interesting one. I have not done that yet, but I think that could be an interesting rise to glory. However, I have participated in one of the most famous rivalries, if not the most famous rivalry in the books, although it is a little bit one-sided towards one house, as we all know. But the Blackwoods and the Brackens are always a good choice because this gives you a very, very intense motivator. I believe they also start off with a feud, but these two hate each other. Now, normally that doesn't come to blows. The two have just been at war for thousands of years, pretty much. So if you want something that's, more acute, more personal, you can play as either one of these. Personally, I would say play as the Brackens because Jonas has 5 children and they all need to get married, whereas Tytos only has 2, and it's just less alliances overall. I believe Southstone also has better forts to start off with. However, House Blackwood does have the very cool Raven Tree Hall, which canonically has a giant weir tree, which is covered in ravens, hence their sigil. The weir tree with the ravens around it. Also, canonically, there's a family member of theirs who's basically Odin, and he lives beyond the wall. You may know him as the Three-Eyed Raven. So that is pretty cool, admittedly. I'm not a Blackwood fan per se, but I mean, it's hard to deny the coolness of that. But other than that, you can't really go wrong with picking any of these. Historically, this is a fairly weak region, so if you did want to make your own kingdom, this is probably one of the easiest ones to do it in. It's incredibly hard to take over a kingdom. It takes a long time, but if you were like, well, I want to make my own paramount, I want to be the next one, the 8th kingdom, then, you know, you could start here. Next up, we're going to go to the Vale, home of House Aaron, very mountainous region, kind of like Switzerland, something like that, like imagine a place in the Alps. So you got a lot of options here. There's really only one way into this place, and it's through here. And as you can see, you'd have to access through like the Bloody Gate, as you guys probably remember. The Aarons do get a really cool castle up here, the Eyrie, which has the Moon Door, as you all know if you've watched the show. House Redfort is always a cool option. They lean a little bit hard into that Redfort thing, because their entire identity is that they're red and they live in a fort. Although personally, we're going to ignore all of these because there's a lot of good options up here that you could pick. This is historically a land of knights and, you know, great power, and it's a lot of mystery too because people don't really come up here because it's difficult. But we're going to go over here to House Royce. Now these people back in the day were kings of this area, the Bronze Lords, and they remember those days. And they're just a really interesting house. Famously, they have a cadet branch, but they might not have one in this. Oh, they do. See, here you go. And she is over here. And House Royce is also the house that keeps the Murder Gate, or, you know, the Bloody Gate, the big one that you've probably seen in the show. And if you haven't, it's basically a gate that's surrounded by mountains, kind of like this. And there's only one way in, and it's the only way into the Vale that isn't just an incredibly long way around, or by sea, if I'm not mistaken. So, kind of cool. You can choose either. Lord Jan, the Bronze, it has great stats. He's only 42, and he has a ton of children. So, if you are like me, and you like to play with a lot of alliances, then you can't really go wrong. Other than that, I don't have anything that I could recommend, because I haven't tried it yet. The Iron Islands are another one that I don't normally pick. It's not a house, or a place, rather, that interests me very much. Even in the books, or in the show, I was never that invested in them. So here, we're just going to zoom in. Now, if you look over here, though, Lonely Light is part of them. Now, this could be interesting because you're sort of way over here. You just have a little lighthouse. If you could somehow build this up to be powerful, that could be really cool. Personally, I would just play as House Drum. For one, their hand is a skeleton. Grasp from Beyond the Grave is a cool house word. And you also get a Valerian steel weapon, Red Rain, which is most likely belonging to House Rain, who were a house down in the Westerlands that were destroyed by the Lannisters. So, kind of cool. You could maybe take over, you could maybe take this over. Maybe you want to move away. Maybe you want to get rid of this, get rid of House Drum, and go down here and retake the ancestral lands of this sword, which is not yours. It was probably stolen, so unlikely that you would want to do that. But if you want to play as Viking boys, this is pretty much the only way. They raid all the time. So if that sort of gameplay interests you, then I would recommend any of these, but I would probably pick House Drum just because they're centrally located and you get a cool sword. Finally, that takes us to the north, and by the north, I'm going to include everything up here. I'm going to include the ice lakes, the fen, the forests, and all of it. Now, if you want to make a kingdom beyond the wall, that's a start you can do pretty much anywhere. I would probably start in the first forest and just work my way out. I've never done this or start as the Then Lords, because they have really strong prowess normally, just because they're all big boys. But if you want to play as a Kingdom Beyond the Wall, that is totally cool. I've just never done it, so I don't have much to recommend. I wouldn't play as the Night's Watch, because if I'm not mistaken, I don't believe you get to, you know, advance through the ranks of the Night's Watch. I think it would just be static. I also don't even know if it would let you pick as it. I've never done it, so if you can, you could totally go for it. I just don't have an interest in doing that. So we're going to click on duchies here. And the north is massive, so there's a lot of duchies you get to pick from. Some of them are cooler than others. It's entirely up to you. Obviously, you have the Starks up here in Winterfell. You have the Boltons if you like being an edgelord. You have the Last Lands, which are very cool. Now, if you wanted a house like Crake Hall, House Umber is probably the best bet. They're also massive, you know, and they're just strong fighters. So if that is the sort of gameplay that interests you, the Last Lands are usually a good place to go. We obviously have the Karstarks, but for me, funny enough, I'm going to go south, and we're going to go down to the Neck. Now, I talked about Howland Reed a little bit ago. However, we haven't really talked about these people. So canonically, the Kragan men, they are Crannig men. They live down here in this castle, Greywater Watch, that moves around the swamp. Now, I don't think it moves in the mod, but it walks around, and the only people who can find it are other people from House Reed, or, you know, representatives, or, like, you know, their bannermen. And I think that that's really, really sick. So to be able to play as a house who was not only there at the Tower of Joy to fight Arthur Dane, who was not only there with Bran going up to the Three-Eyed Raven, but also has an alligator as their sigil and lives in a swamp that is magical and weird. I think that's cool. And just up here, the next one that I'm going to recommend is House Manderley, who I just adore. I love that canonically all of their lads are just fat. I think that that's really funny. Also, they get White Harbor. Look at it. It's an absolutely stunning graphic and a great place to play tall, because realistically, these people are not going to attack anybody. But if you want to make a ton of alliances, maybe marry your way up to the Iron Throne, these guys are about as close to the Habsburgs as you're going to get, at least in the north. So if that's something that interests you, I would highly, highly recommend it. But that's going to be it for this one. I hope you guys found this video useful. Obviously, we haven't unlocked Essos yet, which is a massive region that is just brimming with possibility. But unfortunately, it isn't here yet. So we have to work with what we got for now. So thank you guys so much for watching. I hope this video was helpful. I hope you have fun in Game of Thrones, and I will see you in the next one.